Welcome y bienvenidos to this episode of Love Learning You. I'm your hostess and teacher, Justine Gonzalez. I'm keeping my voice extra low this morning, as you will probably hear birds and background noise. I'm sitting in one of my patio areas outdoors, and I'm attempting to spare my neighbors of my annoyingly sometimes loud laughter and voice. But I'm so glad that you're here today. And I wanted to just take a moment. It's been a couple weeks since I have put an episode live. Really excited that my sister is getting to launch a lifelong dream of opening her own cafe, but I would be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit discombobulated during this time. However, I want to hop right into it. Who else is feeling just so tired? And I'm not going to say it's in a respect of I don't have energy. No, I'm actually feeling very, very energetic and great, especially because the weather change. If you're listening or watching internationally, welcome. At the moment, I am in the Chicago area. Um, and it's actually been really, really great weather. And so I've been feeling very energetic and been out working in my garden a lot. I was actually going to have that as my background for you all, but there's just way too much sun glare, and we're still doing some things outside in this area. But how is everyone feeling? Tell me in the comments, because I do work with a lot of K-12 schools. This time of year can be really tough for a lot of reasons, just because it's so busy. It's really fun, right? So there's a lot of celebrating, but it can also feel really busy in that you can't quite get a moment to spend time alone with your thoughts. And one of the things I want to call your attention to really quick, if you're new here to this channel, make sure that you hit subscribe, and make sure our show notes, we always link a lot of resources, you all. And I have been in my labs and in my zone working on some really things I'm excited to share with you all, but I'll get to those things later. The first thing I want to recommend, and I'm going to put this link in these notes too, the resources. So always look at the captions of any videos I do. First of all, it's a feature. In case you don't know this about YouTube, when you are on desktop, and especially if you are wanting to use videos to incorporate into workshops or trainings, or just to send as resources to colleagues, staff, etc. Give me one moment here. There's going to be some divorce in the neighborhood, including my own. One moment. Okay, I think we're in the clear. I'm back with my coffee as well. Okay, so back to what I was showing you on YouTube. Again, if you are newer to YouTube in general, or you usually are used to it on your phone, the reason I point this out is because so many of us, we do use clips and different things for talks or workshops or trainings or resources. If you're here on desktop, you can actually click this where it says chapters, and you can go through and actually see these bookmarked sections and chapters of the specific topics. So for example, if I'm a school leader and I'm trying to find a resource or an asset for some summer trainings or PD I'm going to be doing in July or August during teacher in service days, I say this because, again, this is a great way for you to be able to pick apart pieces of any type of resource that it is, not necessarily this, but I wanted to recommend this really quick because it's an interview I just got the opportunity to watch. I love Trevor Noah, and there are so many. You can see there's also clipped videos. There's just so many wonderful things about this interview. So I wanted to share that first as a resource, and make sure that you know where to find any of our resources here on Love Learning You, and personally welcome you. The other cool thing from that interview was just, I think, going back to how so many of us, especially if you find yourself in the millennial or Generation X eras, and that is majority of the workforce right now of us are either millennials like myself or belong to Generation X. And that's an interesting space to grow up in, because many of us have seen and experienced and lived different pieces of what Trevor Noah shared. there's many of us who we can't relate to certain things he shared because that's not our lived experience. One thing that really hit me though, that I find myself, and you can even listen to some of my past episodes about genealogy and researching your origin story, all of those pieces. He and I's belief about DNA being cellular and who we are and us being a continuation of our genetic stories and is very much it resonated with me. It's literal, sounded like things that I've said before. And so I think I had some definite key moments where because my circumstances were certainly not his in South Africa apartheid. However, if you listen from the respect of a millennial or Generation X person, no matter where you find yourself on the globe, just I want you to think in general about how he speaks so lovingly, truthfully, but lovingly about his relationship with his mother and father and what that meant and how that played out in his life and how he still has some difficult conversations with his mother, but also has such love and respect for who she is and her wisdom. And I can relate that to that a lot. Throughout my own personal journey and how many of us we have to remember our parents are people born at a very specific time and place and they didn't necessarily choose that either. Just like, right, many of us might say, well, we didn't choose this life, especially on our worst days. And it's important to remember sometimes this difficult truth to hear. Though we may not have chosen different things that have happened to us in life, we get to choose what we do with those experiences. And that has been a pretty difficult truth for me to accept at times. And when we have a lot of resistance, wherever there's resistance strongly, then we cannot really get to the truth and peel back those layers. So it's often said, and specifically because I do work in the realms of change management and what have you. And first and foremost, I'm a writer. So I read a lot and I write a lot. I research a lot. I think that we all have this brilliant opportunity every day that we wake up, wherever we find ourselves. And no matter how dark the clouds may look or how bright the sun may seem, we still have the opportunity every day to control how we respond. And so every day, whether it's rain or shine, I could choose that every morning I begin my morning with prayer. And if that's part of me and who I am and what I'm devoted to, then that will be part of my character and it will show up with integrity in my actions, my decision making, and even at my worst moments when I I am not so polished or sparkled up, right? Which we all have those moments. Um, then I can go back and rely on those habits of mind, those habits of peace of mind, so to speak. So that I just wanted to throw that out there and see if that resonates with any of you all and how you're feeling. There was also a really good conversation recently between, and I think I'll link that interview too, between Robert Greene, who wrote The 48 Laws of Power, along with many other global best-selling books, and Theo Vaughn. And if you've watched Theo Vaughn, you know he's an American, but he's also a third culture kid like myself. Excuse me. He's also a third culture kid like myself, podcast host. And I love the way he shared so vulnerably with his audience about his journey and continues to just be accepting of the fact that we may all find ourselves in very different places with how we view the world and how can we sit at the table and have conversation about our own vulnerabilities and where we are in, he had an entire tour, and this is when I first was introduced to him probably 4 or 5 years ago, and his content, and he had a tour called The Dark Arts. And what he was talking about was going through a dark night of the soul. He was going through a lot of soul searching at the time. And so because he's a comedian, he obviously puts a funny spin on some of these things. Some of the things you may disagree with, right? Any comedian you will often find they're going to say things that are controversial, but there's also patterns in their story and in their life as to why they are the way they are, why they think the way they do, and why they speak the way they do with their candor about certain things. Excuse me. That word, sometimes I don't say it correctly at all. I don't think I do. Candor. Um, but whether you have tuned in on one of our podcast platforms, Audible, Google, Amazon Prime Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or you're watching right here on YouTube and you've subscribed to our YouTube, because we do put some workshops on here that are not podcast episodes for Love Learning You. We definitely have lots of other workshops. But the other thing I'm excited about is we have released the first edition. I have released the first edition of the Inclusive Insights Digest, which is really just a resource wrap up of some core resources that we have put together for all of you. So a little bit about my history is that had the privilege to work with K-12 school districts, nonprofits, and corporations the past 7 years through my consulting firm I founded, called Educator Aid Incorporated. Still loving to continue that path and how that work is continuing to evolve over the years with some research, with different pivots, with trying things, with learning things, with mistakes, with lots of growth as an entrepreneur and writer at the end of the day, and getting back to the heart of everything that I love, which is creating and teaching and also writing. And so I think in order to do that as an entrepreneur, right, you have to consistently be evaluating, am I designing my business, my life, my contracts, everything about it? Am I designing it in such a way that it aligns with what I desire to accomplish in my life's journey? And what is part of the legacy story of me and my partner Thaddeus? Like all of these questions that, especially if you're a millennial or Gen Xer listening to this, and Gen Zers too, you are at those ages in our 20s, our 30s, our 40s, approaching 50s, that it matters to us what we decide to do with our day to day. And I think one of the most important things, especially if you are in a cycle of your life, again, no matter where you are on the earth right now, wherever you happen to be, it's important that you pause and look around at all that has been given to you in your story of your life, and not label all of those things necessarily as good or bad, but what is the entire story of your life so far up to this point? What do you need to process about that? And maybe what are some things that you still haven't learned about those pieces of your story? And then how can you continue to build from there? Because at any given point, we get to write our story the way we want. And sometimes, as the authors of our story, we've forgotten that, with God, our ancestors, angels, divine beings, like with all of those who intend our highest good through the unconditional love of Yahweh, it's my belief that we are here to do exceedingly abundantly more and receive and give exceedingly abundantly more than we could ever ask or imagine often. Because as humans, we do this thing where we stop ourselves from believing in something. And that starts to go away when we're quite young. And that just happens from the world, from the systems that we're born into. And going full circle back to some of Trevor Noah's conversation with Neil Brennan, they both have had so many similarities in their story. They've been friends for over a decade. I think you all may really enjoy that conversation. And even if you're a person who you're maybe still challenged by talking about matters of race, I would also encourage you to listen for that reason. I've always had such admiration for number one, Trevor Noah, how he speaks candidly about his experiences. But specifically in this interview, he also points out those differences of the difference of being a Black American versus a Black person in South Africa and what that means. So, if you're a person, especially if you're an American who's listening to this, and you've only ever lived in America, especially if you've never traveled anyplace else, or you don't know much about the history of South Africa, or you haven't studied it, then I would encourage you to listen. It's a good entry point, especially too if you enjoyed Trevor Noah as the host of The Daily Show. Maybe you're listening and you didn't enjoy him and you don't prefer his views. I would also say with anything, and I have bias with this because these are some of the concepts I teach and that I believe in. Even if you say that, I would still challenge you to watch parts of it because it could open up some new neural pathways and different ideas that maybe you didn't realize that that perspective existed, or perhaps that way of thinking existed, or maybe it validates for you, no, I still believe this way and I still think this way, and this is my perspective. Um, Neither necessarily, I mean, it's all your journey. It's all your journey. And the more that we can put ourselves in a position to sit and say, okay, where's my life at right now? And is it looking the way I want? And decide that you have the power to do something about it today. And a lot of times it can feel like we don't. And that usually comes from some type of a block. And that's Neil Brennan's podcast name, Blocks. And those blocks are often stories that really just go back to childhood and different, not only traumatic events, but just in general, the things that shaped us into who we are, which is why I love talking about culture, personality, communication, and all things cultural and emotional intelligence here on Love Learning You. And then sharing different things, myself as a guinea pig. I'm a forever learner in this life, and I often am trying things out, and I will come back and share about those things with you all. So many more stories to share with you of my journey and on my healing journey. Again, always you can either send a voice memo if you're listening on podcasts or comment here on YouTube. But tell me what else comes to mind? What's coming up for you with some of the topics in this episode? I am so glad that you're here. The final invite I want to give you all is to be sure to click on that Inclusive Insights Digest. You're going to see some of the different things we're working on and be able to access exclusive resources that we have just released over at Educator Aid. So I will link the Inclusive Insights Digest. The link for that I will link below, as well as the two interviews that I mentioned here with Neil Brennan, Trevor Noah, and then Robert Greene and Theo Vaughn. So just some resources, some things that I've been listening to, and different perspectives that I'm always sharing with you all. I will also link, I do now have a list of over 35 Audible titles. It's a curated list and presentation with some other resources. So I'll link that because that's completely free too. And there's also some details I've released officially the syllabus for the first cohort of Purposeful Pages book circles. And these are syllabus. It'll be a 6-month program that begins in September. It'll be the second Sunday of each month. But these are the two titles. I haven't decided how many, if I'm even going to cap a number. I don't know. This is my first time trying it. But these are going to be our two core texts: The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer and The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And if you have listened, you have definitely heard me talk about this text, The Four Agreements. These are both in my top 10 of most transformational, life-changing, I go back to often books. And so these are going to be our two core texts. Again, that same link where you get the free Audible list, you can actually view the whole syllabus. I just published it this week. So that is why I'm excited to share these resources with you all. Again, if you look at the Inclusive Insights Digest, that is going to give you kind of like all of our summer into fall programming and offers and opportunities from Educator Aid. Finally, I will link my brand new personal YouTube channel. There's mainly like cooking and gardening stuff and just having fun in life. So if you want to see more of what I'm up to from an herbalist lens and in my garden lens, me trying sprouts that I grow, all of those types of things, you can definitely go subscribe there. So I will link that other YouTube channel here. But thank you guys. Thank you all for being on this journey. And ladies, and all beings who want to continue to uplift planet Earth and humanity as we grow and learn together. Um, certainly no one is without blemish. None of us are without failures and mistakes and blind spots and blocks and different things in our lives and path. It is, what are we going to do with those things and continue to be iron sharpening iron with those we get to cross paths with in our gifts. So let's continue to get compassionately curious together. Most importantly, I hope that you're loving learning you this week and at least try one new thing. In the next few days after you hear this, say, I'm going to try one new thing. Maybe it's you go sit on your patio for 5 minutes every morning And that's the first thing you do when you wake up. Maybe you have a ritual like I do, where you make a pour over cup of coffee and it's kind of like some type of ritual for you in the morning. And there's something special about that. There's many reasons why that also reminds me of childhood and other things. I was actually final thought on that. And going back to even our DNA being interwoven and linked, somebody asked me that before about connecting with people and how I know how to do that. And, especially coming from such an interesting background with having lots of Amish and Mennonite relatives and then lots of Puerto Rican relatives. I think, and when I really think about it, so my grandma and grandpa, my paternal grandparents on the Gonzalez side, they had a restaurant when we were growing up. And I think about the leaps of faith that they had to take in each of their own lives to even make journeying to Chicago possible from where they each came, and language barriers, anything and everything in between. But then I also think about my mom and dad were the cook and the waitress at that restaurant at times. Many of our family worked there at times. I would be playing there with my cousin. Like, I have such vivid memories, but those were also some of the first interactions where I just saw how everyone in my family treated people. And it was people who were from all different backgrounds and looked all different ways. And I think that that's been really powerful in my life because I like connecting with people. I like studying people. And I've been told that that's a strength of mine. So I think that, one thing is this too. We are all who we are for a reason, and it is each of our responsibility, though, if that isn't being conveyed to people or, we're not communicating that maybe as effectively as we could, and I've definitely continued to make those mistakes in life a lot, then we have to go back to the drawing board. That's on us to become devoted to learning about ourselves. That is not someone else's responsibility to teach us about ourselves. Now, if you're lucky, like I am, you have people who've been kind enough and loved you enough, like my partner Thaddeus, and other people who are very close to my inner circle who they are your iron sharpening iron. And my hope is that your spouse and your partners and your deepest friendships and maybe your cousins or your siblings or your parents, whoever those people are, though, whether they're chosen or they happen to be DNA because of God's divine love, then those are the people though we trust, and we need to trust if they are pointing out a block or something that is maybe a barrier to us seeing ourselves or a situation with love. And so I'm really grateful for those different people in my life. I'm really grateful at this point, for each part, accepting each part of every piece of my journey and not saying, well, this was so bad or this was so good. That can be true. And how will labeling the different events of my life help me continue to move forward? At a certain stage, it helps us because we can identify what that person did to you is wrong and it was painful and it was hurtful. And after we process that, how do we continue to move forward and not be triggered by those same type of scenarios or situations? And then when we do, we learn faster each time. One of the other interviews coming up that you'll see here for our featured voices is Michael Dufourneau, who is an author and also a certifying master trainer based out of France for the process communication model. It's interesting because in his interview when we recorded a few weeks ago that episode, he mentioned something to the effect about, have you ever caught yourself in a pattern or cycle and you get so almost like knee deep into it? Maybe it's a friendship or a relationship. That could be personal or professional, and you go, "Oh, I did it again." And you find yourself I'm telling you, again, watch the Neil Brennan and Trevor Noah episode. Maybe you'll start to see what I see in my own life too, which is, ooh, you gotta go back to little Justine to figure that one out. Whatever that situation is in your life or that pattern that you go, oh, and then we can start to do better. That then I think is when I realize this, but I hope others start to realize, like, that's when life is fun, actually, though. And we just figure out how to manage those changes, which is why I love change management work. I've actually always thrived with fast changes, and I know that that's not very common. I know most people do not like change, they resist change, it's slow for them. I get more on the frustrated end when change is a lot slower to manage. And that is also a whole skill set of being adaptive. And you could probably guess where some of my skills come from with that as far as my upbringing. So, this is getting pretty lengthy. So, I'm going to let you all go and sign off. But thank you for tuning in, and let's continue to get compassionately curious. I hope that you'll check out the resources that resonate with you. And until next time, take care.